June 1945, Okinawa. As the 32nd Army collapsed, wounded Japanese soldiers clutched grenades to their chests, prepared for seppuku rather than capture. Their field manual, Senjin-kun, 1941, commanded, "Do not live in shame as a prisoner." Yet when U.S. infantrymen carried these men into aid stations, something unimaginable occurred. Instead of bayonets, they met morphine. Instead of execution, quinine and atabrine. Under the 1929 Geneva Convention, Articles 4 and 15 required equal medical care for prisoners of war, and American doctors followed that mandate precisely. Military records from the Provost Marshal General's office confirm that every POW received the same malaria treatment protocol as U.S. troops. Blood smears, plasma transfusions, Atabrine tablets, and mosquito net isolation. By July 1945, over 3,000 Japanese captives were hospitalized in Pacific field units and stateside facilities like Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. Inspection reports show infection rates exceeding 60%, but mortality below 1%, a statistic unheard of on the Eastern Front or in Japanese-run camps. Where the Imperial Army had condemned malaria as a divine test, American medical officers saw a clinical problem to solve. U.S. Army Medical Department records detail thousands of surviving patients whose names were entered into hospital ledgers rather than death rosters. For Japanese prisoners raised to believe mercy meant disgrace, the hum of fluorescent lamps and the sting of a needle became a paradox too great to explain. When the Red Cross visited American POW hospitals in late 1945, inspectors wrote, "Treatment of enemy patients is indistinguishable from our own." The figures and quotes are preserved in official U.S. Army archives. The Japanese had expected ritual death. Instead, they met doctors who saved them from a disease they believed would sanctify their honor. How did this transformation from fanatical resistance to compassionate treatment come to define America's wartime morality? Before American medics ever reached them, Japanese soldiers had been taught a single truth: surrender was spiritual extinction. The Imperial Japanese Army's ethos, rooted in Bushido and formalized through the 1941 Senjin-kun, demanded unyielding defiance. It read, "Never live to experience shame as a prisoner." To the average infantryman on Saipan, Leyte, or Okinawa, capture equaled dishonor to one's family, ancestors, and emperor. Pre-war propaganda reinforced this fatalism. Official bulletins, films, and classroom lectures claimed that the United States executed or tortured captives. The Home Ministry's Bulletin of Military Virtue insisted that enemy hospitals exist only to extract information before death. This doctrine of martyrdom was not abstract. During the Battle of Saipan in June 1944, entire companies of the 43rd Infantry Regiment charged American lines in suicidal banzai attacks. Historian George Pfeiffer estimated that nearly 4,300 Japanese soldiers and civilians died in one night rather than surrender. Military Intelligence Service interrogations later revealed that many soldiers believed American forces mutilated prisoners, a myth sustained by wartime censorship within Japan. Even senior officers perpetuated the delusion. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commanding Saipan's defenders, radioed Tokyo, "I will advance to join the ancestors," moments before committing suicide. By 1945, this unwavering confidence in spiritual superiority defined Japanese resistance on Okinawa. General Mitsuru Ushijima's divisions fought to the last trench, anticipating divine intervention or national martyrdom. Imperial communique praised such fanaticism as proof of racial destiny, declaring, "The Americans cannot comprehend the soul of Yamato." Intelligence summaries from captured diaries showed that ordinary soldiers considered death by disease preferable to treatment by an enemy. Japanese military medical manuals themselves emphasized stoicism over recovery. Malaria was to be endured as proof of will. Against this backdrop, American humanitarian compliance under the Geneva Convention was inconceivable to the Japanese mindset. Their faith in mythic invincibility, bolstered by strict censorship and state indoctrination, blinded them to a reality soon documented by captured diaries and Red Cross reports. While Tokyo celebrated unbroken resolve, U.S. records from Okinawa would soon reveal that those same unbroken soldiers were being saved, fed, treated and cured by the very enemy they had been taught to despise. Before the first Japanese prisoner ever entered an American field hospital, U.S. medical officers faced a battle of their own. One fought not with rifles, but with shortages, tropical heat and disease. In 1942 and 1943, the Army Medical Department operated with critical deficits. Official quartermaster logs show quinine stocks at less than 20% of projected need. The synthetic substitute, Atabrine, caused yellowed skin and nausea, and soldiers often refused to take it, calling it the devil's pill. Army Surgeon General Norman T. Kirk later wrote that maintaining malaria discipline among exhausted troops was as vital as maintaining ammunition supply. At the front lines, field hospitals were improvised from tent canvas, often flooded and swarming with insects. According to Medical Service in the War Against Japan, CMH 1956, one battalion's medical platoon on Guadalcanal reported 82% infection within 3 months, nearly crippling combat strength. American doctors lacked refrigeration for plasma, faced shortages of sterile dressings, and sometimes reused syringes sterilized over gasoline burners. Compounding these obstacles was public skepticism at home. Newspapers like the Chicago Tribune questioned the logic of treating enemy wounded while our boys bled on Pacific beaches. Yet official War Department directives, reaffirmed in 1944, insisted that medical services will be rendered without discrimination to all prisoners. Even Allied partners doubted the practicality of such compassion. British medical officers in Burma called U.S. adherence to the Geneva Convention idealistic to a fault. Nevertheless, American medics persisted. They built field laboratories from scrap metal, synthesized Atabrine under chemical shortages, and created malaria control units that sprayed DDT across captured zones. By mid-1944, over 16 million Atabrine tablets were issued monthly in the Pacific. The same scarce medicine that saved Marines on Bougainville was administered to captured Japanese soldiers only weeks later. What began as a desperate improvisation under fire would soon evolve into a moral turning point, one that transformed America's image from ruthless invader to healer, documented meticulously in military medical archives. While the Japanese military clung to ritual and superstition, American doctors fought malaria like engineers planning an invasion. The U.S. Army Medical Department's innovation program, codenamed Project Malaria Control Pacific under the Surgeon General's office, mobilized scientists from Johns Hopkins, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the U.S. Chemical Warfare Service. Their classified mission neutralized malaria's effect on combat strength before it destroyed the Pacific advance. The result was a revolutionary synthesis program for Atabrine, mepecrine, first developed in secret at Winthrop Chemical in New Jersey. By 1943, the U.S. had perfected large-scale Atabrine production, 10 million tablets a month, manufactured under War Production Board supervision. Declassified procurement records show each soldier in the Pacific received 0.1 grams daily, accompanied by strict inspection patrols known as Atabrine parades. The policy extended, by order of the Provost Marshal General, to all prisoners of war under American custody. A 1944 directive stated, "Enemy prisoners will receive the same prophylactic regimen as United States personnel." Behind the front lines, military engineers pioneered mosquito control innovations. U.S. Army entomologists in New Guinea and the Marianas developed DDT spray units that eliminated entire breeding zones within hours. Declassified quartermaster files describe experiments where oil drums, jeep parts, and aircraft engines were repurposed to create portable fogging devices capable of sterilizing a 10-acre perimeter around a POW hospital. At the administrative level, Surgeon General Norman T. Kirk oversaw a chain of medical laboratories across the Pacific, from Milne Bay to Guam, tasked with analyzing blood smears from both American troops and enemy prisoners. These malaria control units compiled what later became the Army Epidemiological Records, 1942-1945, a complete statistical map of infection zones. The Japanese, unaware of this hidden infrastructure, interpreted recovered Atabrine tablets as evidence of American witchcraft. Interrogation reports from Camp McCoy document multiple POWs refusing medication until Japanese medical officers, themselves astonished, confirmed the treatment's authenticity. The innovation was not merely chemical, it was moral. America's technological precision served humanitarian purpose, proving that science could function as strategy. By mid-1945, malaria infection rates among all POWs in U.S. custody fell below 2%, an outcome unmatched by any other nation at war. The same laboratories that developed battlefield antidotes became sanctuaries for defeated enemies. This secret fusion of industry, medicine, and ethics marked a turning point. The weapon was not the bullet, but the microscope, wielded by a nation determined to win not only battles, but the moral narrative of war itself. By early 1945, while the Imperial Japanese Army fortified Okinawa's ridges for annihilation, American planners were laying out a different kind of campaign map, one measured in hospital beds, not artillery range. Official movement orders from the U.S. Army Service Forces show that medical evacuation corridors stretched from captured islands back to rear facilities at Guam, Saipan, and finally to the United States. Within these corridors, malaria control units preceded the infantry. Their mission: prepare treatment infrastructure for both Allied casualties and the inevitable enemy survivors. At the same time, the Provost Marshal General's Office issued Circular No. 19, mandating advanced construction of isolation wards in anticipation of Japanese POW captures. Engineering battalions built modular hospital sections that could be transported by C-47 aircraft, assembled within 24 hours and connected directly to power trucks for refrigeration. Quartermaster Depot records list over 1,000 Atabrine vials and 20 field microscopes shipped weekly to the 10th Army's Medical Depot on Okinawa during April 1945. Weather added its own complications. Typhoon rain and stagnant pools created perfect breeding grounds for Anopheles minimus, the Pacific's primary malaria vector. Field sanitation teams logged daily mosquito counts, while intelligence officers reported Japanese ignorance of disease prevention methods. Declassified MIS intercepts from May 1945 reveal a translated diary entry from a Japanese sergeant. The enemy makes strange smoke and water shines like oil, surely black magic. The strange smoke was in fact DDT mist. As Japanese communications collapsed under bombardment, U.S. logistical precision quietly expanded. American engineers mapped campsites based on drainage gradients, hospital tents on elevation above mosquito waterlines, every position scientifically chosen. The meticulous placement of these facilities ensured that when surrender finally came, captured soldiers would step directly into a pre-built medical system rather than chaos. While Tokyo radio promised final victory, American field reports read like blueprints for salvation: temperature charts, inoculation schedules, and daily quinine logs. The enemy prepared for holy death. The Americans prepared for human survival. And on those humid June mornings, the machinery of mercy was already humming, waiting for the first prisoners who had no idea that their defeat would begin with a pulse check and a thermometer. Dawn, June 22, 1945, the final assault on Okinawa. The last cliffs of Mabuni erupted with explosions as General Mitsuru Ushijima's shattered divisions executed Gyokusai, the shattered jewel suicide ritual. Thousands of Japanese soldiers detonated grenades or hurled themselves from the escarpments rather than surrender. To the American units below, it appeared that none would live. Yet among the smoke and broken coral, stretcher teams from the US 96th Infantry Division began finding the unexpected, breathing men. Field logs from the 10th Army's 7th Division record the first of these, survivors arriving at makeshift aid posts by noon. Many were delirious, their eyes yellowed from jaundice, their skin burning with fever. Army doctors instantly recognized the telltale pattern: cerebral malaria, aggravated by starvation and dehydration. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Hume, commanding the 24th Medical Battalion, wrote in his report, "They expected the knife. We gave them plasma. Each captured soldier underwent the same triage system as American wounded. Corpsmen drew blood, inserted Atabrine doses, and tagged each stretcher with a temperature card." According to Medical Service in the War Against Japan, CMH 1956, over 1,200 Japanese prisoners were treated within 48 hours of capture. The hospital tents ran on minimal supplies. Electricity failed twice that night, forcing surgeons to work under flashlights. Despite shortages, official records show mortality below 2%. Captured Japanese medics initially refused to assist, citing the Bushido oath. US officers instead handed them medical charts. Within days they joined the treatment teams, a moment recorded in the diary of Captain John C. Mason. Their faces changed when they saw their comrades recover. By June 25th, Army photographers documented a surreal scene: Japanese orderlies helping American nurses distribute Atabrine tablets under Red Cross supervision. Meanwhile, intercepted Imperial broadcasts described these acts as enemy deception, but inspection teams from the International Red Cross confirmed the opposite. Their report of July 1945 stated, "Japanese prisoners receive medical attention identical to that of American soldiers, including anti-malarial prophylaxis." Even during combat mop-up operations, the duality persisted: artillery on one ridge, intravenous drips on another. A War Department summary later concluded, "Nowhere in the Pacific was the contrast between enemy fatalism and American science more visible than at Okinawa. The decisive moment was not a bayonet charge, but the sight of US medics injecting life into men who had prepared for death. When malaria fevers broke and breathing steadied, the Japanese prisoners wept quietly, not from defeat, but from disbelief. For the first time they realized the Americans had come to destroy their empire, not their humanity. In the weeks following Okinawa's fall, captured diaries and interrogation reports reveal a recurring phrase among Japanese prisoners: "The world has turned upside down." To men raised under the Senjin-kun Code, the experience of American mercy was more destabilizing than defeat itself. Interrogations conducted at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, and Camp Kauai, Okinawa, between July and September 1945, recorded widespread disbelief. One prisoner, Sergeant Fujio Nakamura, told US officers, "We were told the Americans would cut us open. Instead, they cure us." The shock was not only moral but physical. Military Intelligence Service summaries describe prisoners unable to comprehend hospitals equipped with electric fans, mosquito nets, and ice water, luxuries absent even in Japanese field hospitals. According to the Provost Marshal General POW Statistical Summary, 1946, over 3,200 Japanese captives received full recovery treatment from malaria within 4 months, with a mortality rate under 1%. Many were later assigned to camp work details as translators and sanitation assistants, serving in the very wards where they had once lain delirious. Captured officers expressed humiliation. Major Tetsuo Takahashi wrote in his diary, seized at Camp Lordsburg, "We are saved by the enemy's science. How can we face our ancestors?" Yet American medics recorded a different tone in patient logs: quiet gratitude. Chaplain Lieutenant William French noted in his report from Camp McCoy, "They bowed after every injection. It was reverence, not fear." For U.S. military historians, this period marked the moral inversion of the Pacific War narrative. Intelligence analysts observed that Japanese propaganda began collapsing once repatriated POWs relayed their experiences. Post-war interrogation summaries confirmed that survivors' testimonies undermined Tokyo's wartime myths of American cruelty. The contrast was absolute. An empire that sanctified self-destruction faced a republic that institutionalized preservation, even for its enemies. Within months, the same prisoners who once chanted, "Long live the Emperor," began referring to their caretakers simply as sensei, teacher. This collapse of ideology under the weight of compassion was not planned, but it was decisive. On Okinawa, bullets had silenced resistance. In the hospital tents afterward, bandages and Atabrine silenced an entire myth. The impact of America's medical treatment of Japanese prisoners was immediate and profound. In July 1945, U.S. Army intelligence began noticing a shift in captured communications. Intercepts from surrendering garrisons in the Philippines referenced humane handling of wounded comrades. By August, Japanese troops emerging from caves on Luzon and Mindanao were surrendering in groups rather than fighting to the death, a behavioral shift. Confirmed by the War Department Psychological Warfare Division Report, September 1945. The broadcast of humane medical care, not the atomic bomb alone, accelerated the collapse of resistance across the Pacific. Red Cross dispatches sent to Geneva confirmed that over 5,000 Japanese prisoners had been treated in American facilities by mid-1945, including severe malaria and dysentery cases. The report noted, "Uniform standards of care are observed for all enemy personnel." This finding was cited by the Office of War Information in radio propaganda beamed toward Japan. Leaflets dropped over Kyushu and Honshu displayed photographs of Japanese soldiers receiving injections from American medics under the caption, "The strong do not fear compassion." At home, newspapers framed these efforts as evidence of American decency. A New York Times editorial on August 3, 1945 argued, "We prove our strength not only in conquest, but in care." The story of POW hospitals at Camp McCoy and Camp Grant circulated widely, humanizing a conflict long portrayed as absolute. Within military circles, Surgeon General Norman T. Kirk declared that no weapon equals the moral victory of mercy. His office used these examples to reinforce compliance with Geneva standards across all theaters. Strategically, the effects extended beyond wartime propaganda. When U.S. occupation forces landed in Japan that September, Japanese officers cited reports from repatriated POWs as the first evidence that Americans could be trusted. The Office of Strategic Services summarized in 1946, medical treatment of prisoners proved to be among the most influential psychological operations of the Pacific War. The Americans had achieved what no bombing campaign could, the dismantling of a myth. Through quinine, blood plasma, and disciplined compassion, they turned moral warfare into a strategic victory, one measured not in territory, but in the quiet gratitude of the cured. When the war ended, the humanitarian treatment of Japanese prisoners became more than a footnote. It became policy precedent. In 1946, the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's review of POW treatment concluded that medical parity between captor and captive has become the moral benchmark of civilized warfare. This principle directly shaped the drafting of the 1949 Geneva Convention revisions, which strengthened Articles 13 through 15 to mandate equal medical standards and inspections. Military historians at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College later traced these clauses to reports from Okinawa's field hospitals. Academic analyses, including Donald Moore's Medicine and Morality in the Pacific War, University of Kansas, 1972, argued that the American approach to POW care signaled the transition from vengeance warfare to codified humanitarianism. The empirical record supports this view. Mortality among Axis prisoners held by the United States never exceeded 1.1%, compared to over 30% for Allied captives under Japanese control. These statistics, preserved in Provost Marshal General summaries, became crucial evidence during the Tokyo war crimes trials, where prosecutors contrasted Japanese neglect with American compliance to establish moral authority for post-war reforms. The legacy extended into education and military doctrine. The Army Medical Department incorporated the Okinawa case study into its ethics curriculum at Fort Sam Houston by 1952, emphasizing the fusion of medical science and moral conduct. This was later echoed in Cold War-era humanitarian operations, from Korea's prisoner camps to Vietnam's medical civic action programs. Each drew explicitly on the WWII example that compassion could serve strategic ends. On the diplomatic front, Japanese scholars later acknowledged the impact. In 1964, historian Saburo Ienaga wrote that American mercy was the first medicine of peace. Oral histories from repatriated POWs published by Japan's NHK Broadcasting Corporation reveal that first-hand accounts of humane care helped erode post-war propaganda and facilitated reconciliation. By the 1970s, the episode had entered U.S. medical ethics discourse. Military physicians cited it as proof that adherence to law and compassion under fire reinforced, rather than weakened, operational strength. The same field hospitals that had once treated malaria-stricken enemies became symbols in Army textbooks of the victory of principle over prejudice. The story's endurance proves its historical gravity. America's battlefield mercy reshaped the rules of war, redefined medical duty, and left a legacy that outlived every weapon of 1945. A legacy written not in bloodshed, but in survival. The war that began with Pearl Harbor's fury ended, for many Japanese prisoners, with the quiet hum of a generator in an American field hospital. What they found in those canvas tents defied every story told to them since childhood. That surrender meant shame, that enemies had no mercy, that defeat erased honor. Yet the record stands unbroken. The United States treated over 5,000 Japanese prisoners for malaria, dysentery and tropical wounds between 1944 and 1946, with a mortality rate of less than 1%. Every entry in those medical logs was a small rebellion against hatred itself. Military historians now regard that policy as a turning point, proof that moral conviction could coexist with total war. Surgeon General Norman T. Kirk summarized it best in 1945. The strength of an army lies not only in how it fights, but in how it heals. The decision to extend care to the enemy was not sentimentality. It was strategy built on principle. America's adherence to the Geneva Convention transformed medical compassion into psychological victory, shattering the myth of Western barbarity that had fueled Japanese propaganda. For the soldiers who expected ritual suicide but awoke to plasma and Atabrine, survival itself became revelation. Many later testified that their first act upon repatriation was to tell others, "The Americans saved us." Those words, documented in both U.S. archives and Japanese oral histories, would echo far beyond the wards of 1945. They became the foundation for post-war trust, the first human bridge between conqueror and conquered. History proves that mercy can be mightier than fear. From the Pacific's fever swamps to the quiet hospitals of Wisconsin, America's doctors fought a war of conscience, and won. Because in every age, power tests our humanity, and it is only through compassion that a nation truly conquers.